They laughed when she shuffled onto that stage in shoes held together with duct tape. But 30 seconds later, the entire auditorium fell into stunned silence as a voice like liquid starlight poured from her trembling lips. This is the story of Emma Carter, a 17-year-old from the forgotten corners of Millfield, Ohio, whose journey from ridicule to recognition will remind you that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most broken places. Emma had always been invisible, not by choice but by circumstance. In the hallways of Millfield High, she was a girl who walked with her head down, clutching worn textbooks against her chest like armor. Her clothes came from thrift stores and church donations, carefully mended by her mother's tired hands each night after double shifts at the local diner. But it was her shoes that told the real story of her struggle. Canvas sneakers so worn that the holes had holes, patched with whatever tape her family could find. The other students noticed. They always noticed. "Look, it's duct-tape Emma," whispered Madison Pierce, the student body president whose designer handbag cost more than Emma's family made in a month. The cruel nickname had stuck since freshman year, spreading through the school like wildfire. Emma pretended not to hear the snickers that followed her down the corridors, but each laugh carved another small wound in her already fragile confidence. At home, things weren't much easier. Emma lived in a cramped apartment above Carter Auto Repair, where her father, Robert, worked 18-hour days trying to keep the failing business afloat. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her parents arguing in hushed voices about overdue bills and impossible choices. Should they pay the electric bill or buy groceries, fix the broken heating system, or keep the shop open another month? Her mother, Sarah Carter, worked at Murphy's Diner from dawn until dusk, her feet swollen, and her smile forced her customers who barely noticed her existence. When Sarah came home, exhausted and smelling of grease and disappointment, she would collapse into their second-hand couch and stare at the stack of unpaid bills on the coffee table. Emma watched her mother's dreams fade a little more each day, and it terrified her. But Emma had a secret. Every night, after her parents fell asleep and the world grew quiet, Emma would climb up to the roof of their building through the rusty fire escape. There, under the vast Ohio sky, she would sing. Her voice would rise into the darkness like a prayer, carrying melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her 17-year-old heart. She sang everything. Old gospel songs her grandmother had taught her, pop hits she'd memorized from stolen moments listening to radio, and sometimes songs that seemed to pour out her soul without any conscious thought. The stars were her only audience, and they never judged her torn shoes or second-hand clothes. Under their silent witness, Emma wasn't the poor girl from the wrong side of town. She was something magical, something powerful, something that couldn't be contained by circumstances or cruel nicknames. During her junior year, everything changed when Mrs. Patricia Wells arrived as Millfield High's new music teacher. Mrs. Wells was different from the other faculty. She had kind eyes that seemed to see through the mask students wore, and she had a way of making even the most reluctant teenager believe they had something valuable to contribute. One afternoon, Emma was walking past the music room when she heard piano music drifting through the slightly open door. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, and without thinking, Emma found herself humming along. Her voice naturally harmonized with the piano, creating something that was neither fully planned nor completely accidental. The music stopped abruptly. "Who's out there?" Mrs. Wells called out. Emma's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She had been caught, again, being where she didn't belong. She turned to hurry away, but Mrs. Wells appeared in the doorway. "Wait," the teacher said gently. "That was you singing, wasn't it?" Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on her taped shoes. "Would you come in for just a moment? I'd love to hear more." Emma shook her head quickly. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wells. I was just walking by. I didn't mean to disturb you." But something in the teacher's expression made Emma pause. It wasn't pity or judgment. It was curiosity, maybe even excitement. "Emma Carter, right?" Mrs. Wells smiled. "I've been hoping to meet you. Your English teacher, Mr. Thompson, mentioned you write beautiful poetry." Emma was surprised. She did write poetry, filling notebook after notebook with verses that helped her make sense of a world that often felt too harsh and complicated. But she never imagined anyone would call her work beautiful. "I've been thinking," Mrs. Wells continued, that poetry and music are really just different expressions of the same thing. Would you be willing to try something with me? Before Emma could protest, she found herself in the music room, standing next to Mrs. Wells at the old, upright piano. The room smelled like rosin and sheet music, and the afternoon light streaming through the windows made everything feel golden and possible. "Just hum along," Mrs. Wells said, beginning to play a simple melody. "Don't think about it. Just let your voice follow where it wants to go." What happened next would change Emma's life forever. As the melody flowed from the piano, Emma's voice joined in, tentative at first, then growing stronger and more confident. The sound that emerged was nothing like what anyone expected from the quiet girl in the torn shoes. It was rich and pure, with a quality that seemed to reach directly into the listener's heart and stir something ancient and profound. Mrs. Wells stopped playing and stared at Emma in amazement. "My God," she whispered. "Emma, do you realize what you just did? Do you understand what kind of gift you have?" Emma shook her head, confused. "I'm sorry if I did something wrong. I can leave." "Wrong." Mrs. Wells laughed, but it was a kind of laughter that comes from pure joy. "Emma, you have one of the most extraordinary voices I've ever heard. And I've heard a lot of voices in my 20 years of teaching music." Over the next few weeks, Mrs. Wells worked with Emma after school, helping her understand breath control, pitch, and the technical aspects of singing that she had never learned. But more importantly, she helped Emma understand that her voice was more than just a sound. It was a bridge between her inner world and everyone around her. "Your voice carries your story," Mrs. Wells explained during one of their sessions. "All the pain, all the hope, all the dreams you carry, they're all there in the music. That's what makes it so powerful." Emma began to believe, for the first time in her life, that she might have something valuable to offer the world. Then came the announcement that changed everything. "Attention, Millfield High students." Principal Johnson's voice crackled over the intercom one Tuesday morning. "This year, we're proud to host a regional high school talent showcase. The winner will receive a full scholarship to the Cleveland Institute of Music and a chance to audition for several recording labels. Auditions will be held next Friday in the main auditorium." The buzz in the hallways was immediate and electric. Madison Pierce and her friends were already planning their performance, confident that one of them would surely win. After all, they had private voice coaches and expensive instruments. They wore the right clothes and came from the right families. Emma felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the feeling of being visible in a world where only the visible seemed to matter. That evening, Mrs. Wells approached Emma as she was leaving their after-school session. "I want you to audition," she said simply. Emma's eyes widened in panic. "Mrs. Wells, I can't. Look at me. Look at how I dress. Look at my shoes. They'll laugh at me before I even open my mouth." "Let them laugh," Mrs. Wells replied firmly. "Emma, I've been teaching music for 2 decades, and I've worked with students who've gone on to perform at Carnegie Hall. You have something that can't be taught, can't be bought, and can't be faked. You have a gift that comes from surviving, from struggling, from finding beauty in the darkest places. But what if I embarrass myself? What if I'm not good enough?" Mrs. Wells placed a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "What if you are? What if this is the moment your life changes forever? What if that voice that sings to the stars is exactly what the world needs to hear?" Emma spent the next week in agony, alternating between determination and terror. Her parents knew nothing about the audition or her secret sessions with Mrs. Wells. How could she explain that their daughter, who couldn't afford proper shoes, was dreaming of music scholarships and recording contracts? The morning of the audition arrived gray and drizzly, matching Emma's mood perfectly. She stood in front of her bedroom mirror, looking at her reflection in her only clean shirt, a faded blue button-down that had belonged to her father, and her notorious taped shoes. She had tried everything to make them look better, but there was no hiding what they were. At school, the auditorium buzzed with nervous energy. Students arrived with instrument cases and garment bags, their families in tow with cameras and encouraging smiles. Emma sat in the back row, watching Madison Pierce warm up with a professionally arranged pop medley, complete with choreographed dance moves and a sparkly outfit that probably cost more than Emma's family made in 2 months. One by one, students took the stage. There were piano solos and guitar performances, dance routines, and comedy acts. Some were genuinely talented. Others were clearly banking on confidence alone. The judges, 3 music professors from nearby colleges, took careful notes and maintained politely interested expressions. Emma's name was called last. She stood on shaking legs and walked down the aisle toward the stage. With each step, she became more aware of the whispers and stifled giggles following her. Her duct-taped shoes seemed to echo louder than they should have against the auditorium floor. "Oh my God, is that duct tape, Emma?" she heard Madison whisper to her friends. "What is she even doing here?" Emma climbed the steps to the stage, her heart hammering so hard she was sure the microphone would pick it up. The auditorium lights were blinding, but she could still make out the sea of faces staring at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed amusement. One of the judges looked up from his notes. "And you are Emma Carter," she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "And what will you be performing for us today, Emma?" This was the moment she had dreaded. She had no backing track, no instrument, no choreography. She had nothing but her voice and a song that Mrs. Wells had helped her choose. Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, arranged to showcase the full range and emotional depth of her abilities. "I'm going to sing Bridge Over Troubled Water," she said, her voice growing slightly stronger. A few people in the audience actually laughed out loud. The song was notoriously difficult, requiring both technical skill and emotional maturity that most high school students simply didn't possess. Emma closed her eyes and thought about all the nights on the rooftop, all the dreams she'd whispered to the stars, all the pain and hope that had shaped her 17 years of life. She thought about her parents working themselves to exhaustion, about the cruel nicknames and sideways glances, about Mrs. Wells' faith in her and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this was her moment. She opened her mouth and began to sing. The first few notes were soft, almost tentative, but they carried such purity and emotion that the laughter died immediately. As Emma's voice grew stronger, something magical began to happen. The song wasn't just being performed. It was being lived, breathed, felt by every person in that auditorium. Emma's voice soared through the lyrics about being a bridge over troubled water, and everyone listening understood that she wasn't just singing words. She was sharing her story, her family's story, the story of everyone who had ever felt small and forgotten and invisible. When she reached the powerful climax of the song, her voice filled every corner of the auditorium with such raw beauty and genuine emotion that several people in the audience began to cry. The judges sat transfixed, their pens forgotten, their professional composure completely abandoned. Emma sang as if her life depended on it, because in many ways it did. She sang for her parents' sacrifices, for her own dreams, for every kid who had ever been made to feel less than because of their circumstances. She sang with 17 years of stored-up hope and heartbreak, and the result was nothing short of transcendent. When the final note faded into silence, the auditorium remained completely still for what felt like an eternity. Emma stood on the stage, her chest heaving, her eyes still closed, afraid to open them and see disappointment, or, worse, pity. Then the applause began. It started with one person, Mrs. Wells, standing in the back of the auditorium with tears streaming down her face. Then another, until the entire auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. People were on their feet, cheering, crying, completely overwhelmed by what they had just witnessed. Even Madison Pierce was applauding, her perfectly made-up face streaked with mascara tears. The head judge stood up, his own eyes wet with emotion. "In 30 years of judging musical competitions," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "I have never heard anything quite like that. Miss Carter, you have a gift that transcends technique or training. You have something that comes from the soul." Emma opened her eyes and looked out at the audience, really looked at them for the first time. She saw faces filled with admiration, respect, and genuine appreciation. She saw classmates who had never noticed her before staring at her with newfound recognition. She saw teachers crying and parents nodding in approval. But most importantly, She saw her own parents standing in the doorway at the back of the auditorium. Her father had closed the shop early, and her mother had left work to be there, somehow having learned about the audition. They were holding hands and crying. Seeing their daughter not as the poor girl with the taped shoes, but as the extraordinary young woman she had always been. Emma won the scholarship, of course. But more than that, she won something much more valuable. The knowledge that her worth had never been determined by her circumstances, her clothes, or what other people thought of her. Her value came from within, from a unique combination of experiences and dreams and resilience that made her who she was. The recording label representatives in attendance that day ended up in a bidding war over Emma. By her 18th birthday, she had signed a contract that would change not only her life, but her family's life forever. Her parents were able to expand the auto shop. Her mother quit her job at the diner, and Emma was able to pursue her musical education without the constant worry about money. But perhaps the most beautiful part of Emma's story isn't the fame or the financial security that followed. It's what happened to her classmates and to the culture of Millfield High itself. Emma's courage in stepping onto that stage despite the laughter, despite the judgment, despite her own fears, inspired other students to look beyond surface appearances and find the extraordinary potential in unexpected places. Madison Pierce, who had initially laughed at Emma's shoes, became one of her closest friends and later established a scholarship fund for students from low-income families who showed artistic potential. Mrs. Wells was promoted head of the music department and created a program specifically designed to nurture hidden talent in students who might otherwise never have the chance to shine. Emma kept those duct-taped shoes, even after she could afford any shoes she wanted. She kept them as a reminder that external circumstances never define internal worth, that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unlikely places, and that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about singing your song even when your voice shakes. Years later, when Emma performed her first sold-out concert at Madison Square Garden, she told the audience about the girl with the torn shoes who had once been afraid to let anyone hear her voice. She reminded them that everyone has a song inside them, a unique story that the world needs to hear, but that it takes courage to share that gift with others. The stage doesn't care what shoes you wear, she said, her voice carrying the same pure quality that had silenced a high school auditorium years before. The music doesn't care where you come from or how much money your family has. Your voice, your story, your dreams, they're valid and valuable exactly as they are. Don't wait for perfect circumstances to share your gift with the world. The world is waiting for what only you can offer. Emma's story reminds us that we often underestimate the power of authenticity in a world that seems to value everything else. We live in a society that judges books by their covers, that makes assumptions based on appearances, that overlooks the extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary packages. But the truth is, some of the most beautiful music comes from the most broken places. Some of the strongest voices belong to those who have been forced to find their own strength. Some of the most powerful stories are written by people who were never supposed to have a voice at all. Your circumstances don't define your potential. Your struggles don't diminish your worth. Your current situation is not your final destination. Like Emma, you may be standing at the edge of your own auditorium, afraid to step onto stage because you're worried about what people will think of your shoes, your clothes, your background, your voice. But what if this is your moment? What if your voice, exactly as it is, coming from exactly where you are, is exactly what the world needs to hear? What if your story of overcoming, of dreaming despite the odds, of finding beauty in broken places, is a bridge over troubled water that someone else desperately needs? Don't let fear silence the song inside you. Don't let other people's laughter drown out your melody. Don't wait for perfect circumstances to share your imperfect, beautiful, absolutely irreplaceable gift with the world. Step onto your stage. Open your mouth. Sing your song. The stars have been listening all along, and they're ready for the world to hear what they've always known, that you are extraordinary, exactly as you are. Sometimes the most golden voices come wrapped in the most humble packages. Sometimes the greatest dreams are carried by those with holes in their shoes and hope in their hearts. Sometimes the very struggles that make us feel invisible are actually shaping us into something brilliant. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. Now sing.